Hoi! While testing different builds for the Siren Borderlands 4, I came up with a build that I believe is quite effective for early game, for leveling specifically, while you don't have all the maxed out gear yet, to still keep your action skill Incarnate up constantly. Meaning you get a lot of free projectiles that you can throw at enemies that deal a lot of extra damage, and you get various other benefits that you can get from the passives, for example healing or bonus damage depending on what exactly you spec into. But in this particular case, you're going to have a lot of sustain and you're going to keep your action skill up as long as you don't go down and to fight for your life, and as long as there are enemies around that you can actually kill. We're taking advantage of two different perks here that will allow us to both restore the duration of our action skill, and then along with that we take some extra damage along the way as well, and we get the sustain from picking up the orbs. So let's look at the skill tree first. We're going to look at a lower level version initially because this is a leveling skill tree, so that is what matters, and then later we can look at some options for how to max out this skill tree. So we are starting with Incarnate, and in the first row it doesn't really matter that much what you take. If you like rep kits or if you want splash damage, if that's something you want to go into, then that is possible too, especially because you get the benefit of splash damage being doubled while the action skill is active, so the bonus is an actual 40% in that case. So if you're going for splash damage, that's fine. I'm going to go with Leeching Attunement as a base version here because early in the game you mostly get kinetic weapons, it's just default damage, and you also get this lifesteal from that, which I think is quite beneficial in terms of early sustain. As the second row, I double down on that with Bloodletter, but once again, this is not necessarily what you need to do. I think it just gives you a nice, consistent bonus damage through the bleed especially as well, and it just works well with the previous passive. The other options here are okay too. The rep kit buffs are very nice, for example, and otherwise you could go into the Grave Implement skill, but I wouldn't recommend going into kill skills too early. As much as this build itself revolves around kill skills in a way, I think going into these two right at the start is not that effective, especially on hard difficulty, because enemies initially take a while to kill and they also aren't that plentiful yet. Later in the game, kill skills become a lot more effective. You can also tune up the duration and all that stuff, and with constant enemies around, these make a lot more sense, but right at the start, I think these points are a lot more reliable. The really important thing where things start to go in the direction that we want them to go in is with channeling, but you don't necessarily have to spec channeling first. It depends on how you want to approach this build. We're going to assume that channeling is what you want here, and we're going to go down this path and not the alternative path. But in this case, what we're getting is increased action skill duration and attunement duration. And the action skill duration is increased by 25%. This is not strictly necessary for this build to work, but I think it's a nice, reliable buffer that can overall help us keep uptime. And then one half of the very important skill that you want to do here is Grave Harvest. This perk gives you soul orbs on the ground when you kill enemies while your action skill Incarnate is active. And these soul orbs give you a 20% restoration of your action skill. Along with that, they also deal damage to enemies, they can be detonated for more damage, and they restore your health 35% if they are picked up. So a lot of benefits from this. It requires enemies to be somewhat close together to get the full benefits out of it. I think, for example, singularity grenades are great with this, or putting mobs close to bosses and just kiting mobs into this can be quite effective. But most of the time, really, I feel like picking a lot of them up straight away is helpful, and so far that you just have that consistent uptime on your action skill. And then the other important skill that rounds this all out is the first row here, Grave Sustenance in the Face Familiar skill tree. Because this is a kill skill which also restores a percentage of missing action skill duration. This is while your action skill is active, not while it's on cooldown. So this restores 25%, meaning between this and our other perk that we have here, we get a restoration of 45% per mob that we kill and pick up the orb from. Now, being that one part of this is based on missing duration and all that, it's not quite fully that all the time, but it's close enough to that especially while the duration is high, you can consistently keep it up. Your biggest problem is, again, if you run out of enemies or if you go down, because if you go down, then your action skill gets turned off, and that's what you want to avoid, really. There might potentially be a way around that, but if you're enjoying this overview so far, consider subscribing and clicking the bell. Now, all the gameplay that you're seeing has been done with exactly the skill tree and no more points beyond that. Now, if we were to continue the skill tree from here, we have a few different options, and I want to highlight two of them which I think are both equally interesting. The first option here would be to go down the right side and fully commit to the health aspect, because if you get Great Vitality, you get extra health and health regen per stack. Maxed out, this would be 5% extra health per stack per kill with 20 seconds duration, which is quite nice to get, and that is 10 max stacks. So a total of 50% extra health if you max it out. And on top of that, I think Ars Arcana is also a very nice skill, which increases your skill damage by 40% when maxed. And with these two, you would also unlock this capstone. You don't have to actually go to the points further down, although this is nice too, because while your action skill is active, the lifesteal from this is doubled, so you get 20%, and your action skill is always going to be active pretty much. But what we're getting to here is Heart Piercer, which allows you to sacrifice health in order to use Eldritch Blast whenever you want to. It doesn't have a cooldown anymore. It also gets bonus damage based on 150% of the sacrificed health, and you can also heal allies. And I think this is a very interesting path. If you're constantly going to have your action skill active, then it makes sense to spam the spell as much as possible as well. And with all these extra sustain tools, survival tools, I think that could be very possible. Again, you can also commit into further lifesteal here. But another way to get sustained back, basically, is to get Sanguine Fiends on top of that, which would allow you to restore health per kill, 20% of your health. And that kind of offsets anything that you would sacrifice from using the Blast or Heart Piercer in the first place. And I think that could be a very interesting combination, a very strong combination that is worth investing into for mid-game-ish. I'm not going to go beyond that because this is more for the leveling aspect, and after that, late-game builds will look different anyways. But there's also an alternative option if you're not wanting to commit that much into the spell aspect of it, and I would say that's going down the middle path, primarily for the passives that you're getting here. First of all, Drink Full is just an extremely strong perk. Gives you a fire rate whenever you deal gun damage, so with a fast firing weapon. This is constantly stacked, even though it just has a 5 seconds duration. 50 stacks, so very easy to keep up. I've had no issues having high stacks on this most of the time. And this, I think, is very worth investing into and allows you to then get into Phase Pocket, which is again a skill that is doubled when your action skill is active. And this increases your magazine size by 30% and your gun switch speed by 33%, but that's 60% and 66% respectively once your action skill is active. And I think 60% mag size, quite drastic, quite good. So this perk, very nice. There are also the crit perks, which are interesting, and the kill skill here. Depending on what you're going into, I think I would just put the rest of the points into Keen Mind, probably. Because why not? Or maybe just 2 points into Mortal Terror. Just enough to unlock Vibe Check here, which allows you to, rather turns Eldritch Blast into a charge skill with 3 charges. And activating Eldritch Blast consumes all charges to ricochet on hitting an enemy. And it will ricochet once for each charge consumed. And then the Eldritch Blast cooldown is reduced from gun damage. That aspect is doubled. So that's not quite the infinite cooldown aspect, but gives it some other benefits in return that also should make it relatively spammable from what I understand. But the other reason why this path is so interesting is actually this passive, which is Strike Me Down, because this turns your fight for your life into a immediate second wind or invisibility on top of that too, and a phase explosion. And what I'm not sure about is what I have to test once I get there, if this will actually prevent you from losing your action skill, from losing your Incarnate form. Because if it does, I think this would be a very viable path, a very interesting perk to have, just so that in those rare moments where you end up going down, despite all the self-healing, you have an immediate backup instead of having to worry about losing your action skill and having to wait quite long to get it back. Playstyle wise, this build is pretty self-explanatory because most of the time you're really just killing enemies as usual and going for orbs in between. Make sure you're not focusing too hard on a target with high health while your passive may run out. Just make sure you kill some trash mobs in between, keep that up. It works on most bosses too, because they usually have some trash spawn, and as long as you kill that somewhat consistently, you will get your healing back. But obviously there are some outliers, some bosses that can be a bit more annoying in that regard, where that can be a problem. This is not strictly a boss killing build, because I find that while leveling, most of the quests are primarily mob groups and rarely difficult enough bosses to justify a bossing build. So that is something for higher levels. And of course, remember that you can detonate your orbs. This is easy to forget, but if you look at them and press E, they will blow up. And if you have those spare orbs and you don't need the cooldown reduction at that moment, then why not? If you enjoyed this video, then consider subscribing and clicking the bell if you want to stay updated for more Borderlands content. Thanks to my patrons for supporting this video, and thank you for watching. Sloth, out.